After 4 long, tense days, we've reached a historic moment in this election.
Joe Biden is president-elect.
America's democracy is not guaranteed. It is only as strong as our willingness to fight for it.
Joe Biden's victory was remarkable, not because more Americans voted this year than they ever did in the last 120 years, but because they did it despite a top-to-bottom effort to suppress voter turnout. A record number of Americans voted in this year's election despite a resurgent pandemic, despite
20% fewer polling places than we had in 2016.
65 million people cast their votes by mail, even after President Trump's relentless attacks on mail-in ballots for months heading into the election. Voter suppression is not new to the United States. For years, minorities were systematically targeted to be kept away from the polls.
Voter suppression now doesn't involve dogs on leashes or people with police batons. Very often it's more subtle. It's somebody being removed from the voting rolls. It's a polling place quietly closing down. It's a change in a rule that looks technical but actually affects Black and brown voters the most.
The president's rhetoric against mail-in ballots did have its own impact on people.
What's happening with the voting polls, with the post office, I didn't want to take any chance.
But despite the ongoing, multi-year-long and systematic efforts to keep the turnout under check, the number of people who got out to vote in the presidential election has increased from 52% in 96 to 62% in 2008 to 67% in 2020. From 96 million voters in 1996, we have gone to 160 million voters in 2020. As the number of voters continue to increase, the distance between the White House and the GOP continues to grow. Since 92, the GOP was able to win the popular vote only once, and the gap in popular vote between the Democratic Party and the Republican Party has started to cement itself. In 2008, the GOP lost the popular vote by 9.5 million. In 2012, it was 5 million. In 2016, it was 3 million, and in 2020, it is 7 million. The GOP cannot win the presidency without the Electoral College because the majority who live in the country continue to favor the Democrats. The GOP fears are valid. If turnout keeps increasing, they have very little chance at winning the presidency, and in some cases they will be in trouble even in states that are long held by the Republicans.
There is also a huge political controversy, and that's our politics lead today. With 25 days until the election, the Republican running for governor is being accused of voter suppression by his Democratic opponent. Brian Kemp is not only the Republican gubernatorial nominee, he's Georgia's Secretary of State, and now civil rights groups are suing him, claiming that Kemp's office put more than 53,000 voter registrations on hold. An analysis by the Associated Press shows that nearly 70% of those voter registrations are those belonging to African Americans. This is all because of the exact match law, which is used here, and that means any typo or even a missing hyphen between the voter's ID and their voter registration can be flagged.
I will tell you this. If you look at before and after, the things they had in there were crazy. They had things, levels of voting that if you ever agreed to it, you'd never have a Republican elected in this country again. They had things in there about...
But instead of expanding and reaching out to new voters, the GOP continues to work towards reducing the votes that go for the opposition by targeting minorities. The GOP deploys an array of tools to achieve this. It starts with appointing Republican justices in courts around the country, enacting state laws that makes it harder to vote, and then use the courts to uphold the legislation, gerrymandering districts to pile up minorities into few districts, and so on. Controlling the Senate then becomes the top priority for the GOP to keep the courts in its control and thereby making sure that the GOP state legislatures have the power to restrict access to the polling booth. If the Democrats win the Senate, there are plenty of things they can do.
Win the Senate and choose to make democracy a priority. There's a lot they can actually do. DC and Puerto Rico should be offered statehood. That's obvious. Things like automatic voter registration, mail-in balloting, like we should just make elections a lot simpler to participate in. Make sure the people's voices are being heard more.
And that's a big problem for the GOP. If that happens, if Democrats win the Senate and start bringing laws that expands voter access, the GOP may be forced to live without power for an extended period. A period that's so long that they might be forced to change their current course. And that's a terrifying prospect for leaders of the current GOP who have positioned themselves after Donald Trump. Thanks for watching. If you like it, please subscribe.